We're turning the clocks back to 1991 and catching up with a band on the verge of a breakup. What we would get instead is the amazing album Achtung Baby from U2. Stay with us. Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast 2022 edition, if I'm not mistaken, Eric. Depends on when you're listening to it, though. I mean,
a very first music episode of 2022, which we're really excited.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this next year, you go, well, okay, well, this is old, but for us, it's fresh because we're unfurling it now. So check us out, 3324 podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your support. It means so much to us, and it's such a great feeling each week to spend time with my best friend Eric, and we talk about music. We talk about the movies that we love, and hopefully you enjoy it as well. If you want to interact and engage with us and other like-minded music and movie-loving people, because they're the greatest people on earth, you can join our Facebook group, 3324 Podcast. We've got a great group. We do polls. We have a lot of fun. You can post, you can find us, interact, and that will lead you to our live shows that we do every other week, which are a blast as well.
Yeah, join us on YouTube, and we like the feedback. We like people coming in and talking about the stuff we love as well. We got some real heavy hitters on our page. I have to say, there's some really smart people on our page.
A lot of great interaction. I love it.
Yeah,
I love seeing what people post. I love getting, we've got some people that really post a lot of great information, and I'm a trivia hound, so I love kind of it. I'm getting my daily dose from it as well.
We're getting humbled. We are getting humbled. Absolutely.
So we're in this episode. I just noticed something earlier. This is the third album that we'll have done a podcast on from 1991.
Yeah.
Our first one
was
Nirvana, and we really wanted to address like the rise of grunge and the change and everything. And then, a few months later, we did REM, Out of Time, which came out in 91, which we were kind of positioning as the antithesis to the grunge movement.
That's
where
right.
This group could put out an album in the wave of that and be successful. And now we've got a third one, and I think we're going to leave 1991 alone after this, unless we do Pearl Jam like in 2023. But or we do a different album from them. But this album by U2 is another one of those I think pivot points, not only in music but for a band. Nirvana was a pivot point for the band. I think Out of Time was a pivot point for REM. It repositioned them. This is probably one of the most extreme examples. I'm going to use the term course correction, but it doesn't really apply because they weren't on a bad course. Yeah. It's just that this is a course correction by a band that we didn't know needed a course correction, but they did.
Good point.
What they ended up doing was nothing short of astounding, especially in light of what was happening in 1991, where we were seeing the bubblings of the grunge movement come out and all those great albums. Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 was out. So there was a lot of stuff going on in the music business. And when you look at U2, their earlier stuff, right? When did you get into U2? We have a story about U2. I don't know if you remember it.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
So it goes back a ways.
It does. Probably, I would say for me, it was Unforgettable Fire. That was the album that I took notice of the band. I mean, sure, MTV with the earlier stuff, from Boy and War and they were, posting videos, but Unforgettable Fire for me, there was something about that album that they were already changing, their sound a little bit, just coming away from that real early raw kind of, real political, real like sort of like white flag flaving, waving kind of stuff going on. Unforgettable Fire, at least, because of which we'll get into, of course, with this later, but the production team of Eno and Lanois, I think that had a major factor on their career, basically, as for them. I think they did so much for this band and we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah,
cool. All right, let me roll the stats out, and then we'll continue that conversation about our connection to U2. So this was released in November of 1991, and like Eric said, this is the perfect segue. It was produced by Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno, and they have their kind of DNA on a couple of their albums from U2. So there is a partnership there. It won 2 Grammys, and oddly enough, one of them was Producer of the Year for Lanois and Brian Eno. The other one was Best Rock Performance by a Duo or a Group. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard charts. Interesting for a band on the verge of breaking up.
Yeah.
It went 8 times platinum, so that's in excess of 8 million copies sold. 2005 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees on the first ballot. There was no way they weren't getting it in the first shot. They would know who's not going to say U2 should get it, not get in on this, right?
Yeah, right.
So I remember in high school, in our high school, in the halls, they had all these blank walls. And if you were an art student, they would let you paint a mural on the wall. And if you go to Dobbs Ferry High School, you'll see some incredible art. But what mostly everybody did, for the most part, was rock bands, album covers, Led Zeppelin. You could see everything. And I distinctly remember there was just a mural of a white flag, and it said U2. And that's all it was. And I think it was a friend of ours, Annie, that I think Annie did it. So that it goes back to even before I was familiar with them. I was seeing some imagery about this U2. What does this mean? What is it?
Right. Which at that time we had no idea. We looked at this mural and we're like, what?
Yeah, what is that?
What's the big deal about when people were painting Dark Side of the Moon and Close to the Edge and all these elaborate sort of like artful kind of things, and here was this basically this really basic kind of thing. And I do remember that. That was that's a nice point to bring up.
So it was kind of there, it was almost, I equated to Squeeze in our Squeeze episode. I said people were kind of into Squeeze before I was kind of aware of it. You kind of heard about this band, and U2 was like that. So there was a lot of people that were kind of, getting into it or open to it. And I don't know where they were getting it from, but it was there. And then all of a sudden it showed up on the mural and one day. So we around Unforgettable Fire, of course, you've got the song Pride, which was really their breakthrough hit, followed up by their performance at Live Aid, which, maybe second or third to Queen, but it was still a great performance by them. Where it really kind of put them out on the world stage.
Formidable performance. Yep.
Joshua Tree comes out, which was their monster, With or Without You, Where the Streets Have No Name. I mean, it was just so many great things. The story that positions Eric and I for U2 around that time is Eric was taking drum lessons and I was taking bass / guitar, whichever I thought was easier. I would just vacillate between the two, whichever I thought was easier. I'm going to play bass. And our friend Johnny was playing keyboard. He was taking keyboard lessons. So we would try and kind of jam.
That was our shining moment.
My parents were very much not into the drums thing. They were like not into the loud stuff, but every Saturday.
Unfortunately, not in my house either.
No one wants drums in the house. That's why I was actually wanted to be a drummer. My parents said no.
I picked the wrong instrument. Yep. I got a lot of heat.
Picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue.
There you go.
So we would need a place to jam, and my house had a basement. And my parents, every Saturday, like clockwork, they would leave in the morning. They would go food shopping. They'd do some other shopping. So there would be a 3 to 4 hour window where my parents were not home, and the house was at the mercy of me and my musical desire. So I would drive over. Eric would load up the drums. Our friend Johnny would load up his keyboard. We'd bring everything into the basement. We'd get it set up, and we would just kind of really jerk around. We really didn't do much with it. We would just kind of jam a little bit and fool around just to play to play.
Yeah, you guys didn't like the drums either. Yeah, every time I started to play, you're like, Coob, enough. We got to get this down.
We're trying to practice like a real band.
I'm sitting there waiting to get going, and these guys are like fiddling with this one chord or
trying to get it straightened out and everything. So I thought it would be. I was like, let's try and actually play a song. Like, what is kind of somewhat feasible?
Yeah.
And if you listen to the bass line in With or Without You, I mean, that song is basically the bass line and it's very atmospheric. So I'm like, this is kind of simple. We can, so I snagged the sheet music, kind of learned my part, showed it to Johnny. He kind of worked out just some atmospheric style chords. Eric took over the drum part, and we kind of ran through it maybe once or a half a time. And for a moment, like you get that feeling, like for a moment, it's like we were making music.
Yeah, when it all comes together,
like
that's
it
the
came
moment.
together. It
Yeah.
was wonky. Yep. And then we ran through it a couple times, and there was that one part where it just kind of, Eric was in the pocket with the drums. Johnny was just doing the right thing on the keyboards. I was just hitting the bass just where it should be. I did a little vocal.
You did.
It was great.
Did. Yeah,
it was great. It was a lot of fun.
You
so that was
here
like the
first,
U2.
Folks. Dean sang.
I did sing.
Yeah, he did. he did his best Bono. Did his best Bono.
So that led that. So that was the early days of U2. And then when this album came out, I have another story. This tour, the tour for Achtung Baby, is the reason why I'll never go to a stadium show again. And it's not because of U2, but I went to go see U2 on this tour, and it was a giant stadium in New Jersey, and that's a massive stadium. And we had like the worst possible seats, whatever. That doesn't make a difference. But, and the show was fantastic. It took me longer to get home from the show than the length of the show was.
I can imagine.
And I was so pissed off. I'm like, I'm never, ever going to a stadium show again. I don't care who it is. I just don't want the experience afterwards of having a great show and then being pissed off, like trying to get home. So it's not U2's fault. It's everybody else that went to that concert that wasn't me. It's their fault that I never go to a show, a stadium show again.
And that area in general is hard to get in and out of a giant stadium, right? So that's the Meadowlands. So
the Meadowlands.
You're that's like swampland. You're like you are there for the duration.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody and their mother was at this show. It was just a monster thing, and amazing show though. Amazing show.
Yep. I had no idea you went though. I had no idea you saw them.
Oh yeah, I saw them. Yeah, like I said, it was like probably the worst seats in the house, like total opposite side of the stadium up top. But a brief history of U2. They were formed in 1976. Originally, they were called The Hype, and then they were called The Feedback. You've got Bono on vocals. You've got The Edge on guitar. You've got Adam Clayton on bass. You've got Larry Mullen Jr. on drums. The great thing about U2, it's just been the four of them.
Yeah.
It's, for this length, it's never been anybody else, and it's just been U2, and you don't hear about any fisticuffs and swings like Townsend and Daltrey or Aerosmith.
Well, I was just about to say, they always, the reason U2 was kind of gravitated, was because they reminded me so much of the Who in that sense, like the very anthem type rock, that type stuff. I was like, this is the new Who for me, like the band coming in with these kind of songs that they're
minus the black eyes and the missing teeth.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. They were to me like the Who of the 80s in that sense, sort of like if you listen to like Who's Next or Quadrophenia and that big sound that they were doing with, with Bob O'Reilly and, that was U2, but U2 is far more political, which I have to admit was a little bit of a turnoff. I didn't understand the politics at the time.
The socioeconomic slant on things as well.
Yep.
And that actually kind of haunted them. That was really what happened is they put out, but the album before Achtung Baby was Rattle and Hum, which was a weird kind of a thing. There was a documentary. It was originally going to be like a short film, but then it expanded into a full-length documentary. And then the album itself sold really well. It just, although critically just kind of panned, it was kind of like a live album and a studio album kind of mixed together. So you get live tracks and then you'd get studio tracks. So it wasn't like a double album of here's an album of studio and then here's an album of live. It was interspersed. So when you listen to it, it's hard to kind of get a
read as to what it's
grasp
about.
On it, like to get into a mode.
What are they trying to do
to
here?
Live, you want to hear live. If you're listening to a live album, you're kind of in the live mode. Then all of a sudden you get a song that's just not that, and it's very atmospheric, and then it kind of throws you.
It surprised me because it was not only critically panned, but fans alike. I mean, they were all saying the same thing. In prep for this, I actually watched it wasn't the greatest documentary on Achtung Baby, but they were commenting on how the pomposity of the band at this point, people were just fed up with it because they came off as very like arrogant and pompous.
Oh, absolutely.
And I
Holier than thou,
Yeah, I did not know this. And the thing of it wasn't so much the politics as much as it was them trying to like, oh, we're like really into, like the roots of American music. So you had songs on, when they collaborated with like BB King, that wasn't a good thing, apparently. Or when they were singing the song about Billie Holiday, like, which I love.
Yeah.
I love that song.
I think the
Angel of
critics thought
Harlem.
I think the critics thought they were positioning themselves in
Yeah.
the league of those people when
Yeah.
they were really paying homage to them and honoring them. But
then I
to your
start to
point, people thought that they're just trying to position themselves as being on that level, which
But
they are now. So,
but I start to think about like, okay, well, if that's the case, then I guess the same thing could have been said about people like Sting, right? Or Phil Collins to a certain extent, because they were really embracing jazz and that kind of stuff as well. So
well, Sting did
yeah,
get a little flack. He got a little bit of flack from the jazz community.
Yeah,
for poaching like
I remember a story, Branford Marsalis.
Yeah, Branford Marsalis.
His brother like
Winton
practically disowned him for working with Sting.
Yeah.
He's like, you blew it, man. You're no longer a purist. And he got such flack for that. It's like, wow,
so it's a real thing where there's this cognoscenti of people passing judgment, and it did affect them. They regroup. They go into the studio for their next release after Rattle and Hum. Sessions are not going well. They're taking forever. There's internal strife and kind of arguing or whatever, and they're just ready to throw it in. They're like, you know what, this might not be worth it at this point anymore. And that's kind of really interesting on the heels of I mean, like I said, Rattle and Hum wasn't well received, but it sold like 11 million copies. I mean, it did really well. People were buying it no matter what. Even if it was a dog, the people still bought it when it first came out and were kind of getting it. Because U2 was riding that crest, and that would have been a spectacular implosion had they broken up, because everybody was buying Joshua Tree. I mean, that was like a multiple Grammy Award winning album. It was just like, you talk about the 80s rock. It's like the Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
So for them to get that close, and it was the song One that brought them together. They started jamming, got
it was
together.
Brian Eno. We have to give credit to Brian Eno. He came in and he really, and even though those real early sessions, they just weren't, things weren't quite clicking from the very beginning. They, like you say, there were some things happening there, but it was his insistence that we continue with this. We have to change, your sound. We got to, and the song One, which, we'll get to, because that, we'll get to that point, but that song. Yeah.
So it really holds a special one. The song One, literally about four people, getting together and becoming one again, was what saved the band. They were able to improv. The song was largely improvised in the studio, so that kind of sparked, reignited some of the spark, and then this embracing of techno, industrial. Alternative sounds,
right?
Which is not anything that they were known for. They were known for the, like that big, the jangling guitar of the Edge and the big soaring vocals of Bono, really like ripping it to the crowd.
Yeah,
and this is something totally, the beats are more techno and kind of electronic influence.
Yeah, Larry Mullen was not a fan of like they were incorporating drum machines, sequencers, that kind of thing. And it was just, but to great effect though. I mean, it wasn't. It didn't completely replace what was happening on the surface, but it only added to the flavor of the record. And and what they were really going for here is what this album really brings to the table. To me, it always sounded like Bowie. Interestingly enough, I didn't make the connection then, because what would come to find out that they were inspired by the Berlin trilogy of Bowie albums that came out in the 70s, stuff like Heroes and those three albums that he had made with Eno back in the day when he recorded in Berlin at Hansa Studio, which was created specifically for those sessions. Because of what was happening with the Berlin Wall coming down, and so that was an inspiration for them to do something. I guess that's the political point. I guess the only political point about this album was that they decided to record there because of what was happening in Berlin. And so that was a big sort of lift for them. You know, there was this freedom,
Yeah.
you know, that there's unification happening. So in
Yeah.
a sense, yeah, we're reunifying the band here. So yeah, there was that
Yeah.
feel.
And then the
Yep.
other part of it, which you talked about the political part, but the other part, which was important, is they stopped taking themselves so seriously as well.
Yes.
They were able to loosen up, and not every song didn't have to have this message. And even Bono adopted this persona called the Fly during,
Yeah.
inspired
Yeah.
by the writing of it. But he would,
Yeah.
and then he would take that persona on tour with the leather jackets and the vinyl. That's not something that you associate U2 with, and this
No.
big, broad personality. And so they really kind of started to kind of relax themselves a little bit, almost a parallel to REM. I think we said that about REM as well. When they put out Out of Time, they kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, let's just make let's make an album of just great music.
This is the moment they became rock stars.
Yeah.
I think this is like they're the image, the whole image of the band. Yeah. The leather, the
music
shades.
videos, the dynamic videos,
right. Mm-hmm.
the new sound where it wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't, had this come out maybe in 92 or 93, people might have said, oh, this is a reaction to grunge and they're trying to do something like that. The fact that it came out right at the same time all this stuff was coming out, I think also was a genuine move by them, right? They weren't doing it in a reaction to something, because grunge, the album Nirvana had come out, but grunge hadn't hit yet. The album had only come out.
Yeah.
This was a survival move by the band of we really need to do something different, and we're already tired of that whole U2 image, and what are we going to do about it? So you want to talk about a roll of the dice? I mean, it's got to be one of the biggest rock and roll. I put this album and the album Electric by The Cult kind of in the same thing, because they were both almost 180-degree turns that were necessary, that kind of brought them a new audience or allowed them to kind of continue on in a different way. And this is probably the biggest selling example of a band reconfiguring, not as a gimmick, not as a reaction to the music scene, but as a reaction to what they were doing themselves. And they needed to and it wasn't their foray like, oh, here's our electronica album, and then here's our country album. Yeah. They actually followed this up with Zooropa, which was even more. It took it even to the next degree of an experimentation of, okay, well, what do we, what does this mean for us? And then they were able to kind of pull it back and then reconfigure into more of a straight up rock band.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you might think, I, of course, initially thought back in the day that was like, what are they doing? Like I didn't really, I love the album, but the sort of the image though, like, the change in the image was like they're all of a sudden they're playing big stadiums again. I mean, but in a much more flashy, sort of way. Like this is a total like departure of what they were. I didn't know how to feel about that necessarily. And in a sense, but you might think, oh, well, they're selling out or that kind of thing. Like it's just more of a commercial thing. But exactly. But we didn't know that at the time. Yeah. We were just kind of like, so naive to that. But yeah, they, in their own way, it was a response. It needed to happen for them because we didn't know that there was such disdain for what they were doing. In the late 80s at that point, they were just like, oh, we're done with
internal strife.
It's surprising how much, everybody can just turn, things change so rapidly in the industry. And it's amazing how like in just a few years, how like you're so popular. And then all of a sudden it's just, you're done. Well, we're tired of this. We're ready for the new thing.
Yeah. Or bands will kind of like a parallel to the Beatles with the Get Back documentary, kind of they're kind of limping along.
Yeah.
Right. And some bands they'll kind of limp along and when they really should have been put out of their misery. And U2 is like, well, we don't want to limp along. We can't do that.
That's right.
No matter what. And they could have probably limped along making the U2 sound. People probably would have done it. So again, they didn't do it for the fans or reaction to this or that. They did it for themselves, which makes it genuine. So it's not the gimmick. It's not gimmicky like other bands have done that. Hands down, this is pretty much the most consistent album that I ever listened to from U2. It's like the one that I pretty much will pull out and be like,
that's right.
Here we go.
Every song on this album is great.
This is just so special and it's just so well done. Like, especially when if you listen to their other stuff and then you listen to this, it's like, oh my God, it's so different, but it's so great. And they just really, they pulled it off.
Mm-hmm.
Like mission accomplished. They did it. It was like, and not only did they do it, they did it to the nth degree. I mean, like I said, this thing debuted at #1. So people were ready for something. And the music, again, there's maybe 2 songs that you could say are echoes of U2, that have some of the kind of the trappings of a U2, but mm-hmm. when this just starts out with Zoo Station, I mean, you're just,
it's such a different,
it's got the processed vocals. It's got the industrial kind of techno drumming.
Yeah.
It's opening not like anything else that you've heard on a U2 album.
I think it again, I can't say enough about the production team on this record. I mean, Lenoir, and they knew what they were doing. I mean, to me, it goes back to Peter Gabriel as well with So.
Yeah.
How much of a departure that was for him. It was such a more commercial sound, but yet
still Gabriel.
It's still Gabriel. It's still weird. It's still out there, but he knew instinctively what to do, what to bring to the table. Gabriel at the very beginning was like, I don't want any cymbals on any of my albums. I just want drums. Lenoir comes in, I want cymbals. And with Red Rain, he comes in with Stuart. He's got like 3 different people playing hi-hat on that song alone. And that, but yeah, that's what he brings to the table. That's why he's one of my favorite producers of the late 80s and going into the 90s. And he did a lot of his own material, which is great in itself. If you've ever heard of any of his own stuff, really good. Really
he was
stuff.
Very much in demand in the late 80s. Robbie Robertson,
Bob Dylan,
everybody was looking after him, trying to get him to work with him. Now with this, because there's 2 producers, what they actually did is they gave each producer a crack at the songs and said, all right, Brian Eno, go ahead and you mix it down and give us your mix and what you think, and Lanois, give us yours. And they would either pick one or the other, or say, well, we like elements of this and elements of that. So can you go back and remix it? And this album was literally being mixed, I believe, up until like 3 weeks before it was released. And then, the Edge grabbed the tapes and flew them out to California. So oh God, this is just one of those albums that it's like Zoo Station kind of sets it.
Here comes the gushing, folks. When you hear
better,
Dean go,
even better than the real thing. It's like one after the other. It's kind of even better than the real thing. Then one, until the end of the world. Who's going to ride your, So Cruel. I love. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just such a great collection of songs. Even though it's a different sound, they don't sound the same.
No, they don't. And you know what? It's refreshing. It makes you want to listen to the next track. I want to hear what's coming up next. It's unlike, I have to admit, I mean, Joshua Tree is a monster, but it's not a perfect album. I mean, not every song is great on that record. I mean, I think for pound, Achtung Baby just blows it away in terms of just every song.
Except maybe their greatest hits, which don't count. Greatest hits don't count. So I think this is going to be easy for us to say this is their pinnacle.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
So you got even better than the real thing. Then you have One, which is that song
One,
that they needed too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I back in the day, One probably didn't affect me like it affects me now. But this song might just first of all, it's my favorite song by U2, hands down, and it's the first. And you know me, I'm always going for like the deep cuts on albums. There's always a better song than the hit. But in this case, I'm going to go with the first song that they did for that they recorded for this album, and it's one of the hits. It's my favorite U2 song ever, hands down, and I just can't say enough about it. I don't know what it is about it that really affects me. Every time I hear it, I have to hear it to the end.
Yeah,
and when you really dig deep and you really take the time to listen to the song, it affects you so. It's a statement for all us weirdos, all of us misfits, all of our, we're just.
It's a simple song.
It is a simple, and that's the thing.
It's simply presented, and it's heartfully sung. That's the thing too. Is you really get a great top-notch vocal performance from Bono.
He
doesn't oversell it. He's in the pocket with this, and he knows kind of where to rein it in and not go big and booming like he can.
There's not a time I think I hear this song, even on the radio and just passing, like I'll tear up. There's not. There's not. I don't think you could probably.
You got to stop giving yourself paper cuts. That's why you tear up.
Yeah,
all the time.
I think I think from this point on, every time we hear this song, if we're together, if we're hanging out or whatever, and we hear this song, you're probably going to put it on just because you want to see me freaking
I was just about to say that. I said as soon as we see each other in person, this is going to be on when I pick you up. Like you better believe when you come in, it's going to be playing.
Well, I'll tell you, this almost made my list of the alternative hits episode that we did.
It would have been a good one.
It would have. But I didn't think that you two quite fit them, because we were looking at groups that pretty much were formative in the 90s.
Yeah.
U2 was sort of a but this
would be an outlier. They would be considered an outlier.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you put U2 on the list, it wouldn't be out of place, but someone might be like, yeah, why is U2 on this?
Yeah.
But
exactly.
it wouldn't be out of place. I don't think, again, for what they did. If this was a U2 album that sounded like a U2 album, then it would be like, yeah, it doesn't belong.
If you didn't know who they were, if you hadn't heard the old stuff, and and I got to admit, I mean, the Edge the Edge really stands out on this album for me. I mean, I'm glad to see him. I'm glad they gave him such texture to his guitar work.
That's what I was going to say.
That buzzing guitar that I love so much, coming from Brian Eno, which he did with Bowie, which, reminds me of Robert Fripp of King Crimson, of that kind of, that raw, I love that sound, the James Iha from Smashing Pumpkins, the same thing.
Yeah. More like the Andy Summers and the Police, where it's textures.
Yeah, that's right.
And feelings and experimentation with sounds, and not the jangly. I mean, I think
you kind of get tired of that, don't you?
Yeah.
That
I mean, I think we got that only in, I think Ultraviolet was really the main song that had that on this album.
But go back and listen to their old stuff, and it's kind of like you're getting the same kind of thing, right? The same riff, the same like rhythm. There's very little like lead happening, like there's like, and after a while, I could see how that can get a little tiresome, and especially if I were the Edge, I'd be like, I want to do something different here, like I could just see him wanting to do, like, expand on that, so yeah,
absolutely. And you've got a rhythm section, bar none. I mean, I don't think Adam Clayton gets enough recognition as a bass player. He is so low key, he almost does not exist.
Well, he does the job.
I mean, he had his share of issues, he was, back in the day, but he just comes in, he executes. He's not a flashy bass player, but he is an excellent bass player.
Mm-hmm.
And Larry Mullen is just one of those guys too. He's just a workhorse. I mean, he's kind of like a, kind of like a Bill Berry from REM, just kind of back there, just kind of getting
the drummer
done.
that he does the job, but nobody gives him the credit. Yeah. It's like the drummer never gets the credit. Because you're overshadowed
by Bono and the Edge. I mean, you've
exactly.
got those two in the band.
Yeah.
And then the other two are standing behind in the shadows.
I remember my sister had such a crush on him, though. Back in
on who?
Larry Mullen. She was
Larry Mullen?
she was all over that guy.
he's like a cross back then he was a cross between like Billy Idol and Sting.
Yeah,
kind of looked
exactly.
like he could be a younger brother of both of them.
There you go.
With the spiky blonde hair and the movie star good looks, but these guys are just low key. I mean, they just kind of get it done, and Bono is like the showman, and the Edge is kind of out there.
Yeah.
So we got to give props to especially Adam Clayton. His bass work is just really a really unsung hero of the band, kind of like Nigel Harrison and Blondie as well. Same type of thing.
Yeah, that's
where these guys are back there getting it done, but the front guys get all the credit. So we've got, I mean, gosh, just this is one of those albums that it's just song after song. If you've never listened to this album in its entirety, I suggest. The songs don't flow where you need to listen to it, but I suggest you sit and listen to this album as one complete thought, and you'll kind of get what they were trying to do.
I totally agree. Yep. Yeah. Do not skip a track.
Pick this. You could easily cherry pick this and you have a great experience.
Yeah.
But I think if you listen to the whole thing, I think you kind of it gets you in the groove with them, and the way the songs are arranged, as far as the track listing, I think it really is just
so what are your favorite? What are your standout tracks on this?
I wrote a few down. Like I'm writing. I'm like, well, I got to stop writing because it'll just be everything.
yeah.
So it's kind of like always, even better than the real thing has always been a favorite. These are pretty much the hits. Mysterious Ways, I love. because it's just so different from what they were doing.
Yeah.
The stuff that's a little more closer to U2-ish is Trying to Throw Your Arms Around the World. I love that song as well. Oh God, because that's just so atmospheric, and they really just excelled at they didn't say, oh, we need to change our sound so every song is going to sound electronic or techno. You know,
yeah,
like
we got to.
They played with different, just not sounding the way they used to, but it doesn't mean everything has to sound the same as a result, because you're trying to be different.
Well, it's saying that we're still here. We're still U2. We still have roots. We're going to throw a little bit of that back to the fans. I think, it's important to do that. I think, you need to remind people of what they were at some point, just if only just for a little bit. But I think one for me, So Cruel. I love I like Acrobat a lot. I don't know why. It just, that stands out for me. And then Love Is Blindness, the last song on the album, is just gorgeous as well.
Yeah,
it just it gets you.
There's a great lyric from Trying to Throw Your Arms Around the World. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. It's like truer words have never been spoken.
Yeah, I think true. So. Yeah.
And, men need women more is kind of like men would be lost without women, but he's saying women, you know what, you don't need men. You kind of, it would be a waste. But
who's going to ride your wild horses too is another. I mean, that's one of the staples, like the radio staples too. But man, that's a great one too, especially
and that's
when
like one of
their
stadium songs.
Yeah.
That's like one of those big songs. So it's got such a variety of the tender stuff, the atmospheric stuff, the electronic stuff, the techno stuff. I mean, they really just.
It's groove worthy too. It's me, I'm all into the groove thing. So and then rhythm. So there's quite enough of that on this record, so you can actually move to it, even though the songs are extremely personal. And which that we haven't really mentioned is the fact that there's really no politics on this. It's all about love and just self-deprecating type stuff, real personal for the first time. It's like, you talk about reinvention, but lyrically too, it's like they're, I don't know, it's kind of like their Layla moment in a sense, like where it's this sort of like anthem. They're still very, very sort of anthem. Like these songs are huge, but it's very personal at the same time. So it's hard to really, you don't have to go down, like really get real quiet to sing a love song. Or to talk about heartbreak. You can do it in such fashion that it's so big, and Bono's voice, and it really carries, and it's amazing. It's just amazing stuff. Yep.
Yeah, and to take this out on the road, I mean, like you had alluded to, I mean, it was like a they had like all these cars like on the stage, like painted and weird, and it was called, I think it was like the Pop Mart tour, or that might have been after this. They really, really kind of relaxed that whole bringing the message to the masses type thing, and really kind of started to subvert even, I guess, the people's opinions of themselves. And that's really what this is too.
Yeah.
Is kind of taking the U2 myth and turning it on their head, and Bono becoming this character, the Fly, who can say things and act a certain way that Bono could not, and by adopting this persona, and he actually adopts a few personas in his career. He had one, the Golden Cowboy, I think, and then another one called Mephisto, which was kind of a devilish version of the Fly. I mean, Bono like dyed his hair black for this character. That's where he's like
in the red leather. Yeah.
Yep. So he kind of really, it really put them on a different trajectory. His, Mirrorball Man, I think, was the one with all the gold, and he wore like a cowboy hat and stuff. So just embracing some of that weirdness, and maybe some of that Bowie influence of different characters, right? Like Ziggy Stardust and the Thin White Duke, and
absolute glam. Yep.
Those types of things. So it's just kind of very interesting that they were able to pull it off. That's the beauty of this. In
the 90s, no less.
In the 90s, and that it was embraced.
Everything was back to form, like we talked about, like analog again, flannel, and right. And here's U2.
This could have bombed. I mean, this could have bombed and still have been a great album, and it could have been one of those ones that nobody, like, oh my god, when you look back now, it was a misfire then, but it's so it was a turning point. It was a turning point, but it was also a turning point that was so successful too, which really was the win. They could have put this out and it not done well, and they could have just said, well, we're staying on this course no matter what, because this is what we're doing.
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
bonus is that the fans and everybody came along, and that really gives you, I guess, probably that extra push and that extra motivation and that validation that what we've done, it was right.
Yeah.
And from our fan standpoint, again, they don't do those things necessarily for the fans, but I'm sure that doesn't hurt.
Right. And I think, like I've said before, the production team really knew
you're
what they
hot
were
on
doing.
the production team.
I am. I'm going to give them full credit, because
do you get $1? Do you get $1 for every time you say Eno?
No. Well, okay. Hey, we said it before. They were ready to break up.
Yeah,
that's a fact, right? And if it weren't for Brian Eno and Lanois, they probably would have, if it weren't for that direction and sticking to that and saying, listen, we know what we're doing here. Let's do this. And it paid off.
And keeping them. Yeah, they actually did challenge them. There was a I forget what the hell it's called. Oblique. Brian Eno has this strange theory about about productivity and how to get things done. And it's right, and it's I'm gonna butcher it, but he's got this way of working. I forget what it's called, but it's something like, I don't know. You write down a bunch of different things on cards, on like index cards, and it's almost like a way to challenge yourself. Like, something old is new again. So that if you pull that card, you're going to try and write a song that's maybe reminiscent of what you've done, but something new, or no drums or something like that. You would have all these different cards, and they would pull them, and then that would kind of be the spark of an idea of, okay,
that's an interesting way to do it.
Here's our idea.
Yeah, sure.
And it was just kind of very interesting. I forget what exactly it was called. I was reading about it, but Brian Eno was like very much, even back in the 70s, like it was a really kind of promoting that type of work. It came out, somebody else kind of really pioneered it, but he kind of adapted it for music.
Yeah, when he did his own stuff, I mean, some of it was extremely minimal. I mean, he was very much a minimalist in a lot of his own work and that kind of thing. And it was just, but yeah, you're right. I mean, he would take that kind of weird, like, abstract approach of just coming up with ideas and stuff. So there is a term for it. I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of it offhand. But yeah, very much when he was working with Bowie, I mean, that was. And those three albums, those three albums are so different in themselves too, as well. So, because I've been listening to a lot of Bowie, like, I don't know why, but lately, ever since he died, I've been kind of diving into the whole, Bowie, and amazing stuff. And I'm trying to I take it in doses. I'm not like full on. I don't want to like burn myself out with it, but it's just like I've been listening to like the different stages and amazing stuff. So yeah, but that period with Heroes, which is probably one of my favorite albums, it like I said, like this album kind of the sound of it and the I wouldn't say it's like it's the vibe of it, and it just it really is reminiscent. But I never, back in the day, I didn't make that connection. It was so weird. So I was so gratified to learn that. Oh, you know what? Fucking Eno, he's working with you too as well. I was like, what? And they, like, what the hell have I been, right? So,
I could have had a
anyway.
Yeah, it is. It's just a we're gushing, so we'll probably tie it up before we kind of get everybody so on a sugar high from such sweetness that
there you go.
We're spewing. But yeah, you've got processed vocals, you've got just a totally different way of doing something. And again, plenty of bands have done the experimentation thing. This was more of a survival move, which kind of a big roll of the dice. Yeah. Paid off in a big way. It set them up for it literally set them up for the next 20 years to continue, readjusting. And it gave them that ability to not be afraid of, okay, yeah, let's, we can kind of adjust our sails. And if we need to kind of go this way, we can go that way. And whether the audiences have come along with them, but that kind of, I think that helps as well. Is that, like I said, they weren't necessarily looking for validation, but I think having it really kind of helps you feel like, oh, okay, our fans are with us.
Well, they need to find that in themselves, I think. Yeah. Definitely to get to that point where when that this is working, when that, okay, I get it now. We're doing something special here. And I think that did happen at some point, even though in the very beginning they might not have thought so, only because of probably they were still thinking about what the critics were saying. And it was such a low point for their, to them to kind of, how do we move on? I mean, that's got to be hard when you don't have any ideas and you need that outside source to come in and say, well, let's try it this way. And you're like, oh, I don't know about that, but you're like, you know what? It might be good for us. So, and it definitely was. So,
yeah. The, what else? The term I was trying to remember was called Oblique Strategies.
Yes.
And that was popularized by Brian Eno. And so you should, I'll put a link in the show notes to the Wikipedia entry about Oblique Strategies. And it's just really, it's just a really interesting way to be of maximizing productivity or sparking creativity. And he didn't invent it, but he really pioneered kind of adapting it and using it in music. So we'll put a link in the show notes for Oblique Strategies. And if you want to really learn something random, you just did.
There you go.
That's random even for me. That's like super random. So they would follow this up with Zooropa, which really had a very, it's a very odd album, but it's endearing in that way because they really took the trajectory and really just ramped it up and really kind of really went for the electronic sound with like songs like Numb.
Yeah.
And Lemon, which is sung in this really high falsetto by Bono. And it's just, it's so quirky that you know that they're not taking themselves seriously, but they're having fun doing it, which is where you want a band to be.
Well, that's the thing too. It's like Bono's voice on that's what I wanted to comment on as well, is like some of the inflections on this album on Achtung Baby. Like there were several moments on the album where it was just like, whoa, what was that? Like some of the way the tone of his voice sounded. And I'm trying to think of the song in particular, but oh man, it was such a great vocal moment where like it almost felt like his throat was closing up a bit.
Yeah.
And it was so compressed sounding, and but then it opened right back up, and I was like, what the hell was that?
Yeah. He did embrace something different from his big booming voice where the streets have no name and
where
pride
it's like
in the
this
name of love.
Like you have to shout it out.
Yeah,
like,
he brought it down. He actually did specifically, or bring his vocal stylings down, sang in a lower register for some of these songs where you don't have to blow everybody's eardrums out or really go high. He actually ended up on this album experimenting and going lower and using his voice as an instrument in a different way than all the power singing that he's used to doing. Yeah,
I think the comparison to that was, I think in the documentary that I was watching, they mentioned was the Walker Brothers. The approach to like the songs like "The Sun Doesn't Shine Anymore," and the way that kind of builds up, and it's like it's so low, but then it kind of. Like they refer to it as a crooner, but to me, crooner is like Frank Sinatra, where he's not really singing. Right here, it's like, no, I don't. This is like you're projecting. But the build of it is like it gets to that point where you're just waiting for that crescendo, and it's so oh god, it's marvelous. It's so good.
This is going to be the final episode in our 1991 trilogy. Right, I think we've covered. I think we've kind of covered.
Yeah, I think so.
I think for 91, I think we've covered the bases. We hit the Nirvana, we hit REM, and we hit U2. I'm not sure that, I mean, it was a lot of great stuff. When I look back, I'm like, oh god, let me see what else came out in 91, and it was so much. But I'm like, I think these three were the pinnacle.
Well, we need to go back to 81, I think, and we need to.
Okay, that's perfect. Law and Order, Lindsey Buckingham. There's you gave me the opportunity for the Lindsey Buckingham mention.
Oh, there you go.
I'm going to take it just like on SNL. I think that's going to do it for this episode. Achtung Baby is just absolutely a spectacular album. It's one of those ones that we can explain it, and we can explain what the sounds were and the different choices they made or why. But you got to listen to it. That's the bottom line for this one. Is you got to kind of sit there and listen to this one. And like I said, it's got a lot of hits, so it will be an easy listen if you're not familiar with the whole album and you're like, oh, okay. I think you're going to like it. Everything there's not really any clunkers or any stinkers. There's not any songs like Mother from like Synchronicity. Like there's no weird stuff. Like
there's no fillers. I would say fillers is probably the accurate term for this album, because every song is good. At least, it's quality stuff. There's no song that's just like,
each song carries you to the next one.
Exactly.
Like you're not trying to get through.
And say, I think a lot of
this song is next. I want to wait until I get to that.
And I think a lot of young people could really get into this record too. And I was just before we started the cast tonight, I was actually talking with my wife and my son. We were talking about how old music is becoming so revered today by young kids today on YouTube and these reaction videos. We mentioned it before, but it's so great to see that kind of thing. I think this album would qualify as definitely recommended. So for our young listeners out there who are checking us out, we definitely recommend this one. It's a great one. So
yeah, absolutely. 91 just wasn't Nevermind. There was some other stuff as well.
That's right.
And that's why we highlighted two other ones. And I think that kind of rounds out 91 for us. And really, if you want to feel for what was going on, you get those three albums as far as like in the rock arena for the most part. Again, it's a broad statement, but those three will put you in three different positions. And I think you'll be okay with 91.
Yeah.
and kind of have a good feeling, right? And at least from us, what was popping out for us in 91. So that's right. A great one. And this, like I said, U2 is still going. They formed in 76. So you're talking 46 years now, as a group with the same people. They didn't have the same name in 76, but the same four guys have just,
fortunately, they're all still around. They didn't replace anybody.
And they're not tearing each other's hair out and just like really, sniping at each other on social media. You don't hear anything. You just hear, oh, there's new music by U2.
Yep.
And they're going to tour again. So good on them. To set the time machine back to 1991, go check out Achtung Baby. It's a good middle point. Again, you can go forward with the sound that they were pursuing, or you can go back from here and hear the other parts. This is one of those demarcation points that we talk about in a group. You can go back and listen to the stuff previous, which is great stuff. It's fantastic. And by no means are we dragging it. It's just different. And the band needed to do something different. And they did. And they absolutely, they rolled the dice and they came up big time on this one. So that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Check us out on social media, 3324 podcast. That will work on Instagram. It'll work on Facebook. 3324p will get you our Twitter account. You can interact with us there as well. Check us out. We've got new episodes every Thursday, and we've got smaller bites called quick hits and different subjects. We got those every Monday. So join us for both of those, won't you? And we'll see you online. For Eric, this has been Dean. We will catch you on the flip side.